Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew White, coming to you from Ingram Micro's Business Transformation Center. And today we're going to be talking to you a little bit about webinars. So if you guys are familiar with Webex Events back in the day was Webex Events Classic, then it became Webex Events, and now it's Webex Webinar. If you're looking at the new Webex Events, that is the old Socio platform, which we're not going to be discussing today. But I wanted to show you a little bit about how to create a series, how to add webinars to that series, and then how to actually show off the recordings. So let's go ahead and get started. So you find webinars on the left-hand side here as long as you're given the authorization to use it by being given a license inside of Control Hub by the admin. If you don't see it here, contact your admin for WebEx, but if you do, it should be right here on the left. So from here, you have these two tabs. So you have My Webinars and Webinar Series. You can actually create a webinar series and schedule a webinar up here using these buttons. So let's go ahead and say we want to create a webinar series. So let's give it a name and a description of the entire series. Okay, so from here, you can see that you have different contributors. So contributors are people that can add their webinars to your series. So if I wanted to add additional people here, I could just click in this box and start typing their name. So I can see I can invite those people to this, and once they're invited, they can actually just add their webinars to my series as well. So if they're a host and they want to add additional things into this series that they want to talk about that are prevalent, they can. Now, over here, I can see my copy series invitation and my basic information. So this is the link to this particular registration link. Now, if I go to that link, there won't be anything in there to see yet, so we don't want to go there because we haven't put actually any webinars in the series yet. If you want to customize your registration form, you can go down here and edit. Now, this registration will be for every single webinar in your series. So if somebody adds their webinar to this series, this registration will take precedence over any other registration that they've created. So if I want to go in here and say that I want to add this question, I want to make it a required one. Let's say I want to also find out their job title, but I don't want to make that required. I can just do that. I can also add a customized question here if I want to add my own question. And I can click on these little three dots to delete questions I decide I don't want to have. If I do want to preview this form, I can just click on the preview button and see what this looks like as far as what everybody else will see when they go to register for the different events. And then I can go ahead and save that when I'm ready. Now down below here, I can also see the registration type. So how do I want people to be able to register? Do I want to allow people to register for multiple different registration or multiple different webinars in the series? Do I want to allow people to only register for one of these? So say it's I've got 4 different trainings, they're all exactly the same topic. I don't want people registering for all 4 of them. I can restrict that to only have to register for one. And then I can also allow attendees to register for all the webinars in the series at once. Let's say I'm a teacher, or I've got a webinar that kind of builds off of each other, like the first webinar then transitions to the second. You don't want to be missing the beginning ones to attend the later ones. You can actually make this a series, so they have to register for all of the webinars at once. When I go ahead and save that, and then down below here, I do have the description that I created earlier, and I can edit that as well. Now, there isn't any actual webinars in this yet, so I have to go back to the list, and I have to schedule a webinar. So if I click Schedule a Webinar, it'll allow me to create a topic, and then down here, I'm going to pick the day and time that this is going to be happening and the duration. If I do want to plan it out because I've got people attending from multiple time zones, I can actually scroll up to the top here, pick another time zone. So let's say it's East Coast and Hawaii that I want to see how these line up. I can say, okay, well, I want to make sure that people can still attend this thing, so I don't want to make it any earlier than 8 a.m. So I can see that right away it's 2 p.m. and 8 a.m. would be my start time. And I probably wouldn't want to go any later than 4 for my East Coast, so I've got a couple little time slots in there. And I can add additional time zones as well. Okay, now from here, I can just apply this time. So I figured this is the time that works best for me. And then underneath that, I can pick who else I want to have as panelists. So let's just say I want to include Dan here as a panelist for this particular one. I can mark him as a co-host as well, so he can run the meeting in my stead if I can't attend. Keep in mind that one of the differences between standard WebEx and WebEx webinars is that if you're on a standard WebEx meeting, pretty much everybody can be seen and heard. In a WebEx webinar, only the panelists can be seen or heard. So if you don't invite somebody as a panelist, if they just use your standard invite invitation and just register it as an attendee, they can watch the presentation, but they can't participate in it unless you promote them to a panelist during the event. So it's a good idea to make sure that all your panelists are entered in here. If you type in them by name, they'll show up if they're inside your same org. If they're not in your same org, you'd have to type them in by email address. And then you can give the webinar agenda just a quick overview of what's going to be covered. And if you do want to go in and create HTML formatting, you can do that as well. And then down underneath that, you do have security. So you can give it a password, which you can randomly generate one using this little button here on the right-hand side. It'll keep changing it, and it's going to follow the guidelines that your company requires. And then you have your panelist password. Again, you can randomly generate that. Again, people that are just joining the webinar are going to use a different password than your panelists. You want to make sure your panelists have that invite email along with their password. If you do want to require people have an account before joining a webinar, which would restrict people to your particular group or organization, or restrict webinar to invited attendees only, so that way the registration won't be enabled. You can do that, and then only the people that you invite to this particular one will get access to it. Otherwise, you can leave those both unchecked, which I usually do. So then in the next section, you have your audio connection options. Underneath your audio connection options, you either have WebEx Audio if it's enabled for your organization. WebEx Audio is going to allow you to have people call in with a standard landline or cell phone, something that's like a standard PSTN connection, where if you're going to click the use VoIP only, it means that people can only dial in through like a computer or the WebEx app to be able to hear and listen to that audio. If you pick none, no audio would be transmitted during it, which is not very useful in most cases. Your entry and exit tone, this one pretty much allows you to hear a beep or announce the name of somebody that joins your webinar. I would highly suggest using no tone, especially if you're considering having a lot of people join this, so that way you're not being disrupted if people are joining late to the meeting. And then you have the mute panelists. So you can have the pretty much allow the host and co-host to unmute participants, which is called a moderated unmute mode. If you do select this, this means that when you start your meeting, everybody will get a notification that's saying that the host or co-host can actually unmute them. It's a great idea if you have people that are not very familiar with computers and you want to be able to make sure that you can unmute them when you need to and that they're not going to be fumbling around with the mute button. But if you find out that most of the people that will be speaking or all the people that will be speaking have a pretty good handle on these type of softwares and how to mute and unmute themselves. Leaving that unchecked also gives them a little bit more peace of mind that they're not accidentally being pulled into a conversation when they're not being aware of it. You can also allow panelists to unmute themselves in the webinar or make it so that you have to request that they unmute themselves. If you keep this checked, then they can unmute themselves at any time. If you uncheck it, then only people that are requested to unmute themselves can unmute themselves. And then always mute panelists when they join the webinar. When you first join a webinar, it'll give you the option to mute or unmute yourself. If you have this checked, then it's automatically going to mute them when they join, which can cause some confusion sometimes when people aren't familiar with the software. But it does help if people sometimes join with their audio turned on and they're already talking to somebody next to themselves, which can disrupt the meeting. And then you have your advanced options. So automatic start recording when the webinar starts is a great way to make it so you don't forget to record the webinar. You can always trim down the webinar after the fact before you post it or send it out to people. So if you think that that's something you're going to forget after the webinar is going, it's a great idea to actually click that start recording when the webinar starts. And the practice session, which is automatically start practice session when the webinar starts. A practice session is a way of allowing people to talk to each other that are panelists without having all the standard attendees here. Now, When I do check that, you can see that this one got grayed out. So you can't have automatic recording and practice session automatically start when you do this. So if you do want to have automatic recording, then you're not going to have the practice session. If you do the breakout sessions, that allows you to have small groups that people can join after you start your meeting. So if you want to have small group discussions about a certain topic or things like that, that's a great way to enable those sessions. And you can pre-assign people, pre-assign panelists to those different groups to make it more of like a roundtable type discussion. And next you have the webinar series. So from the webinar series, you can actually go in and add this webinar to webinar series. So I click that, I can see that there was already a webinar series in here. I can create a new one if I wanted to, and then I would just click OK. Now it's not required to add things to webinar series. So if you're just doing a one-off, you can do that as well. And all these steps here that I've shown you on this section can be just followed the same way. And if you do that, then you would still have the ability to create your own registration for this particular topic. But if you want it all underneath the same series so people can register for more than one at once, then this is where you select that so it all shows up. I can make registration required for this. And then I can see what the registration form looks like. I can't change it because, again, that registration form is tied to the series in this case, but I can actually click down here and see how my registration form looks. And if I wanted to change that, I could contact the person that created the series and ask them to update that. I could randomly generate an ID authentication for each registrant so that they would have to enter that in before joining. This pretty much makes it so I don't have multiple people joining with the same link. If I want to lock it down a little bit, I can make sure that everybody that's registered are the ones that are attending. And then I can either automatically accept all requests, which I usually do, but if you want to be more stringent on who can actually attend, you can set up rules. So maybe those rules mean that it's going to have a first name or a certain keyword that shows up that I can change, or an email. So let's say the email contains a certain address, so at im-demos.com, so everybody at this domain would be able to get approved. But if I wanted to maybe reject certain people, I could do that as well. Or I can make this an entirely manual process. I'm just going to cancel that for now. Interpretation allows me to assign different interpreters to this event. So if I have a multinational event or just an event where I've got people speaking a lot of different languages, I can actually enable this interpretation so that way I can have, say, 3 different translators all working at the same time, and then people can work with whichever one they want. And then I have a email reminder. So how long before the event starts do I want an email reminder to go out to everybody? Let's just say I want 1 hour before the start time. And then the webinar options themselves. So do I want to allow for chat? Do I want to allow for polling? Do I want to allow for notes, file transfers? All these things can be enabled or disabled. They're all going to be enabled by default in most cases. But if you do decide that you're going to use something else, like I don't know, a different platform or a different app for the chat piece, the polling piece, you can disable this ahead of time instead of having to disable it once you actually start the meeting. Go there. And then pretty much I can send out the invitation to all participants when I schedule the webinar. If I click schedule, I'm just going to run up to the top here so I don't send messages to people that I don't actually want to think that this is an actual event. And then I'm going to hit schedule. Now you can see here, if I actually look at this webinar, I can see the host information, the attendee information, the panelist information, and then I can scroll down to see it in addition. So again, these emails are going to go out to the panelists, but if I want to actually recopy them or send them over to somebody in case I've forgotten, I can do that as well, or if somebody's lost their email. One of the other great things about webinars is you can brand them. So if I go into edit here, I can actually change what this looks like. So I can make this a darker light theme. Did you see there? I can change the logo. So right now the logo is this Webex by Cisco. I could change that. I just got to make sure that I follow these rules over here on what the size of the logo is. The background image, which is this one over here, So you can see it highlights what it's going to be changing. Again, you just have to follow these rules. And then the color, which if I click on this one, I could actually go ahead and change the background color of that other section. Maybe I want it to match my company colors, or I wanted to make it be a little less dark. I can do that as well. And the same thing with the headers and the body and the highlights, all the same thing, and the buttons themselves. So I can go ahead and save that once it looks the way I want it to. And then if I ever wanted to make any quick adjustments to the actual webinar, I can click this little edit button. It jumps me to the same section that I was in before. I can also save webinar templates. So once I save those, I can then just pick them from a drop-down so I don't have to do all this creation for every single one. I'm just going to cancel that. I can delete it if I want and cancel the meeting all entirely to anybody that's been invited. I can send an email invitation and I can add it to my own calendar. Now, if I scroll down a little bit further, I can see my Manage Registration button. So I click here. Anybody that actually comes in and gets either auto-accepted or auto-rejected, or is in a pending state because I have it to be a manual approval, I can then go in here and manually either accept or reject those. So I would click the little box next to the person and click Accept, or click the box and click Reject for those people if I was manually adjusting these. I can also see a list of attendees that were manually added by myself. I can see a email message. I can customize the email template so I can see what it looks like. I can turn on a reminder to panelists. I can do a first reminder and then pick what it looks like when that goes out. All of these different things. So I can send up reminders for the panelists, a first reminder and a second reminder. I can also send out a thank you for attending message, an absentee follow-up message, or remove from panelist lists. And I can turn each one of these on or off. And I can also customize them here on the right. So if I want to edit that template, I can do that here. So it allows for a lot more customization and a lot more automation of those messages that are going out instead of your marketing team or whoever it is having to manually do that all the time. Let's jump back to the webinar information page here. Okay. And here's where I can view during practice sessions. What do I want them to be able to see when I'm in a practice session? This is relatively new. So this is the default. All they see is a blank page that says webinar will start soon. Thanks for waiting. If I want to go in here and actually change this background a little bit, make it look a little bit more Webex-y, or if I want to load my own image, I can do that as well. You can also load GIFs if you want it to be a little bit of an animated background. And then down here, I can actually change the text as well. And it gives you just a quick representation of what it's going to look like on the left there. And if you want to add a little bit of background music, you can do that as well. Just be aware it's only a 5 megabyte file or less, and it has to be an MP3 or WAV for it to allow it to load. So if you have some messaging, audio messaging that you want to go out, you can do that ahead of time. And as far as like video files being loaded ahead, there isn't an option for that yet. However, that is on the long-term roadmap, so hopefully we'll see that eventually. Okay, so let me just go ahead and save that change. And then here's, again, my post-webinar survey. So if I want to ask some questions after the webinar ends, I can put in additional questions here that automatically go out to those people. I can preview what the survey looks like. And then I can go ahead and save it. I can also change the layout of the actual survey. So do I want to change colors, make it look a little bit different? I can upload a header image, all that to make this more advanced. Okay. And then down below here, I have a landing page. So if I do want to send somebody to a particular website once the webinar ends, I can do that as well. So maybe it's a informational page that I've created, or if I'm going to be selling the product, maybe it's the place where people can buy the product from, wherever that may be located. I can send that out as well. You could technically do that also through an email that automatically goes out, but the auto porting them to the page so they don't have to go looking for that email is a nice little touch to make it more advanced. And then if I wanted to track where people are coming from, I can actually track invitation sources. So I can create a source ID, I can send that invitation out to a certain email address, and then if that person emails or forwards that invitation off to somebody else, that person will also come through with the same source ID so I can track where those people are coming from and who's doing the invites. Okay, so that is everything at the actual Webex webinar creation. Now, if I go back to my list, I can see anything that's upcoming, and I can change again. It's not showing right now because I put it further in the future. But if I wanted to change this out to be, let's say the 6th to the 20th and hit OK, I can now see that that shows up here. I can see my registration information, and I can start my webinar directly from here. I can also, if I go, this is just my personal calendar, if I go back to webinars themselves, same thing, I can click and see ones that are upcoming. There we go, ones that are upcoming. And then I can also go to the webinar series now, and you'll see different ones under the webinar series. So if I click on the series, it shows one webinar. I can see that that webinar is in here. I can delete it from here. I can add additional ones. If there's additional contributors, they can add it using the steps that I showed you before. But really, as I complete these webinars, they don't automatically drop off this list. So they're still part of the series. Now, if somebody registers for those webinars, the downside is they can't actually view the webinar. They're going to get the invite to the webinar, but they're not actually going to be allowed to see the webinar. Now they can go into that webinar. I can, as the host, I can go in and find those people and send them the recordings if I wanted to, but there's not a great way right now to track who watches those recordings. So they can, obviously, you can lock those recording down, you can put a password on them, all that stuff, but the actual tracking and finding their information, so maybe you want a ID code or their email or something like that to follow up with them after they watch the recording, then that's where we would want to go in and actually make sure that we're adding them to Events Classic. Now, that is something that hopefully will come to webinar in the near future, but let's just say I wanted to change this and actually add that past recording to a list. So that way they can go to a particular website, which is hosted by Webex. They can click on those old recordings and watch them. And then that allows them to still get that registration information, that page that you want to pull from them. But before I do that real quick, I just want to show you what the registration page looks like. So again, we have the overall registration form, which we showed you here a little earlier. But if I go ahead and cancel that, and I go to the basic information here, I'm just going to cut and paste this into another tab. So you can see here that I have the ability to register for this one event. If I had multiple events here, because of the way I selected it earlier, I'd be able to select all the different events that I wanted to attend. I can go ahead and register with my first name, last name, email address. Again, these are all the same questions that I created earlier. But the thing that's missing here is once I go to register for this event or the series, so all the ones I picked in the series, it's going to register me for all of them. I'm going to get the invites for all of them. Now, if I do want to actually post those recordings after the event has happened, I will show you how to do that now. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do to post that recording and make it so that people have to register to view it is actually going underneath the Webex Events Classic. And here you can see what type of programs that have already been created. Now, if you want to create a new list of a whole bunch of recordings, you're going to want to create a program first by clicking on this Create New Program button. From there, I can give it a name. I can give it a description. I can say how many people I think are going to register for the program, if there's a budget, an email for people to reach out to, and then if I want the program listed or unlisted. Now what that means is that an unlisted program is not going to be visible to people. So unless you send them the direct link, they're not going to be able to easily find this program. A listed program means that if somebody goes to the general overview site of all your programs, they're going to be able to find it, register for it, listen to the recordings, things like that. And then down here, I can also require a registration ID. I can require a password for the actual system. I can again do the registration here. So this registration form is different than the other one. So let's just say I wanted to require an Ingram Micro account number to view this. I could do that, and I could check and see additional questions. I can see create a drop down list question, things like that. I click save. There we go. And I can allow registrants to invite friends if I wanted to. And then once they register, do I want to ship them off to another website where it automatically opens? I could do that as well. I can customize the program page to give it a different look and feel to match what I want. And then I can create the program down here. So once I create that program, I can see that this test program is now listed. If I click on the program, it'll give me a program URL, which I can send out to people, the email of the person who's managing it, if they need to look at that information for additional information. And I can add other recordings to this program. Now, if you click this other recordings to this program, it's going to show that I don't have any recordings currently to add. If I click here, it's going to give me an error. I have to actually upload recordings first before I can add them to a program. So on the left-hand side here, you see My Event Recordings. If I click on that, I can actually add a recording. So if I click Add a Recording, I can give it a name. I can again say if I want that recording to be unlisted or listed. I can give it a program. I can add it to a program automatically from here. So if I just add it to the test program, I can do that immediately. And then I can put in panelist information. So if I want to say who was part of that recording, I can give it a description. And then I can say I want to provide a URL which launches to a particular recorded version. So if you're doing a WebEx recording from Webex Webinar, you can grab that URL from Webinar and drop it in here. I could also use a file on my local PC and actually upload that file. So if you want to edit the recording and then re-upload it, you could do that. And if I wanted to use a file that's already on the WebEx network, I could look that up as well. So if I had ones that I had already previously recorded, I could look those up and add them. I can change the date on which it was created. So if I wanted to say this was back from 2005, even though I'm uploading it today, I can do that so people know how old that content is. And I could say the recording start time and the duration. And now down here I have access to the recording, so I can require registration here again. I can customize the registration form. I can prevent people from downloading it. If I want to keep it only for users that are inside my org, I can require users to sign in first before they can view it. I can allow playback, and I can password protect it as well. And then again, at the end of the playback, I can send them to a particular site. I can have them see a survey of how they thought or what they thought of the recording. And then once I hit save down here, it's going to save it all over to it. So let me just upload a file from my PC here real quick. And then down here, I'm going to hit save. Oh, duration of the recording is, let's just say 1 hour. And you can see here, I did this on purpose, that this is actually not going to allow it to upload because it has to be smaller than 200 megabytes. In the world of video, that's pretty small. So I either have to dramatically shorten the length of the recording, I have to make that a smaller video file by lowering the resolution or something like that, or I want to not actually load the file and I want to provide the URL. In most cases, that's what I'm going to want to do. So let me just say I'm going to provide the URL. I could drop that URL from my other recording directly in here. And then that URL you would get when you click share on the old recording, and you can share it with everyone. And then just grab that URL and drop it in this spot here. And then when I'd click save, it would then show up in my programs list so I can send people to the overall program. Or if I didn't add this to a program, I could add it later. or I could just send people to this exact recording. But in this way, now because I have registration required here, when they go to watch that recording, it's going to ask them to register to watch it, just like it would ask them to register to actually attend the event. So this way, it makes it a lot easier for people to do reporting afterwards to see who it was that watched those recordings, when they watched it, how long they watched it for, all that stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and just cancel this. Now, if I go back to my programs from this page here, if I click on the little checkbox, I can actually go in and click the delete button here for ones that I've created. So I can delete that, and then it'll actually remove that program out completely. And if I go back to list now, it's gone. So that's the quick way of actually making a recording onside the Webex site that people have to register for watching. If you so choose, you could also create your own website, make people log into the website and track things there, but it's a little bit harder to track if they actually clicked on and viewed the recording versus using this method, you actually know if they watched the recording or not. Again, my name is Matthew White. Thank you for joining us here at Ingram Micro and the Business Transformation Center to learn more about Cisco and Webex. Enjoy the rest of your day.